So this is an old piece that I did during my thesis, and I think it was like 2013. And one of the things that I was never really happy with was the the piece kind of felt bland to me. So I decided to kind of revamp it and redo it and kind of work a little bit more on the development of the process of like being a little bit more creative, being a little bit more emphasized when I'm doing something like this. So I took the original piece and I basically turned it into a black and white, and I really pushed value more. I tend to go really dark with my values, so and that's because I had a class that really forced chiaroscuro down my throat, and so this is kind of my process of kind of reversing that chiaroscuro, which isn't a bad thing, but it tends to darken everything I do. So once I started working with this, basically started pushing myself to be a little bit more developmental in the process, more, put more creative pieces in there. And so I was watching one of my tutorials that I downloaded and buy, and they had an 80-20 rule. So basically 80% normal and then 20% what was already there, something a little bit more creative. So that's something that so I wanted to get a more humanistic proportion. I always feel my faces are a little bit more cartoony than they should be. So I got some photo reference, and I didn't want to copy the exact face, but I wanted something a little bit more realistic. So I kind of played around with the nose a little bit more. I changed the jawline a little bit more, and got a little bit thicker in the jawline and things like that. Kind of tweaked the eye a little bit at some point in time. And I have some sketches here that I just did in doodling around just to kind of give me an idea of something different, something to like a different take on the Dracula character. So you can see here what I'm doing is I'm just basically grabbing this and kind of painting the grayscale versions right over it. And so I just picked the ones that I liked and kind of built out and created more of the costuming on the Dracula character. So in this particular one, I basically wanted kind of a suit coat. I started looking at a little bit of fashion and things like that to kind of get the idea going on of more of that developmental phase of how things look. And I always kind of struggle with, when I do art and things like that, I tend to be rational about things, and I think that's kind of a downfall in my creativity. I think that, when I think about a character, I think 1800s, and I automatically, start whittling down the thought process behind this character. And so one of the things that I did was I essentially just kind of put in a real simplistic idea of what I was kind of developing. So I kind of wanted to go with a tribal theme, something a little bit more wild, a little bit more different. And so I wound up actually putting tribal designs all over the costuming and things like that. And I thought that kind of added in a little bit more, like it's the embroidery that a lot of the kings and stuff had, but it's different than what everybody else had. So it kind of made it a little bit more interesting. I think that was the cause for it. And I slimmed it down the pants, and I pretty much just basically painted in boots. here. This would be something, if he was riding a steed or something like that, this is kind of his riding outfit, and I lightened him out. And working in grayscale, it's actually a little bit easier. Like, I like how the grayscale looks as a grayscale, but when I color it, I am not happy with my colors, so it tends to be this kind of very flat tone that I have to work with. So with that done, then I basically reverted back to the original piece here, and I just started kind of building up more of kind of the design of his jacket and things like that. So I put more of a vest going on him. And now this is the old file here, so I essentially basically built off of the same existing one, but I didn't copy it because I didn't want to have all of it the same. So I kind of just played around with the values and kind of worked with some different things like that in order to get a different kind of effect going on. And so in this one, I have more of a long coat going on. It's something I thought worked better for the scene here. And so when the long coat was, basically put in there, it's just a matter of working on little ideas. Now, one of the things you see here is, and it just happened, is sometimes you're painting and you want to paint the empty space, and that's why switching the brush to behind works really great for a quick fix like that. So I spent more time developing, like I didn't worry about color, I didn't worry about anything like that. And one of the problems I get is like with teaching, the big thing I get is all these students and they do the typical barbarian, and it's very iconic, and I really wanted to try and stay away from that with this particular piece. So with this one, I essentially went with a little bit different aspect. I didn't want to go with that typical standard concept. I wanted something a little bit different, and a little bit more stylized, a little bit better designed, and and that, again, I kept with that tribal motif, and I think that tribal motif really sets the character apart from my other iterations. I think it adds in a little bit more emphasis of what's going on, and I still was okay with the skull buttons that I used. So what I did was I copied and pasted them out and put them into another place. And so here I'm basically redesigning the coat. I kind of like the coat. I like where it was going. So I wanted a little bit more emphasis on kind of that tribal aspect. So here's where I added, that fur feeling to the overall character. And that fur, I think, implemented much more of the wild aspect of him, and it created something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more better designed as far as that goes. So after this, I'm essentially just really trying to push the elements of design on this character. I'm not too worried about the face. I'm not too worried about anything else. I'm trying to get a unique look, and so I'm just drawing in basic forms, basic concepts, and things like that. And a lot of this is more or less just me trying and problem solving things. In here, like the fur on the jacket was essentially, I think I got it from one of Vin Diesel's XXX jackets that he was wearing, and it had the fur on it, and so I thought that was kind of an interesting concept. So I really wanted to keep that tribal mentality, and I basically worked on one face until I got it the way I liked it, and then kind of went through and cleaned up everything and just copied that same face over and over and over. I felt that was kind of the easiest way to go about it, because the facial expression, I really didn't care too much about the face itself. And a lot of the stuff that I did was essentially just create a new layer, collapse it, create a new layer, collapse it, and I just kept working on things like that. Now, this is actually my least favorite character. I think that this one was something more or less of the lines of just, I saw a royal outfit that one of the Romanian people was wearing, like one of the Romanian royalties were wearing, and so essentially it was just kind of almost felt like a band uniform after a while. The idea was there. It I didn't think it translated very well. It didn't have that pizzazz that the other ones worked for. And you can see a lot of what I'm doing is I'm working off of the window copy, and I'm going back and forth between these originals, and just kind of picking up ideas and working with little bits and pieces. And I found a royalty sash that one of the kings was wearing back in the day, and so this royalty sash basically turned into kind of on top of that, and I added some metals and things like that. And again, I really, I don't think the design flows very well. I think the design on this particular one just didn't feel that interesting. And so then what I did was essentially take a color layer and start painting over everything. As you can see, I'm just doing red, and my red is my intro color. It's my accent color for everything I want. And I think that it's pretty simple, pretty easy, and I actually toned it down a little bit so it wasn't so bright. And I went through and I basically created like blues and things like that in order to create kind of that grayscale bluish feeling to it. So as I continued to work on it, and I like the original piece to some extent. I like the original arms and things like that. So I just went through and I started doing. I created a color swatch because I got sick of going back and changing the different layers. But I went here and I basically created my light purple, and this is all solid colors. So I just need to go through and kind of pick one area or one that I really like, and I'm going to push that concept, I think, a little bit more. It's something that I think works well. I also went through and I didn't like the solid, the previous one I think was like a bluish white shirt. So I went through and I got rid of that blue shirt and I used a white for just simple cotton. And I colored in the brown boots, and I kept things consistently so that they'd look like just basically different outfits with that character. So I tried some different variations and things like that, and it kind of worked out. This painting method to me is kind of foreign. I don't use it that often. So when I do it, I feel like I don't know, I just feel like it's not something I want to work with. But the grayscale to me reads better, and I don't have an issue doing the color. I just have to remember to go back in and add more colors on top of it in order to kind of clean it up. But I always feel like it's just a messy way to do things because of the simple fact that it is like I don't do flats, or I didn't do the flats in this case because I started with an existing piece, and I felt that was kind of a non. If I would have had the flats, it might have been better, but I felt like I'm always cleaning up and doing things like this. Whereas if I would have just layered this out in separate layers, I think I could have gotten it cleaner, especially when I went back to kind of touch up the embroidery here. And and I think the embroidery, the nice gold on the red stood out. I think it worked well for what I was trying to do. And I didn't get too bright with it, so it's not like it's this drastically large piece. And as I painted, I did everything for the hair and all that stuff, and I think I should have pushed more of my design elements. Adding the color in is fine, but I wound up actually going back, and I felt that the face was very kind of off. There was something off with it. It basically was too many hard angles, and the shadows didn't lie right. It just you know, I felt that that needed some work. I used a little bit of a blue hue here to kind of paint in this overcoat jacket here. And the nice thing about being a clipping mask is I really didn't worry about what I was painting, so I was just kind of painting things through. And when I'm doing stuff like this, I really need to figure out the thing I struggle with is the clipping masks, everything feels so muddy. And I always feel like I have to go back in and do all these little touch-ups. And these little touch-ups are drive me nuts. Like, I want to go in and paint and give the impression of what I'm doing and then move on to the next thing. Like, I don't feel like this is something that really works that well for me. And here I spent a little bit more time working on the face. I went through and I realized that I wasn't happy with the face and I needed to kind of go in and clean it up a little bit and do things. So I added a little bit of red tone to it. And the red, it's just layer on top of layer on top of layer, and I adjust the color and kind of I just didn't feel like things were working for the face. I thought the face itself was I just keep getting this cartoony like feeling to it. I wanted to get a little bit more realistic, and so at one point in time I kind of grabbed this color and rotate it a little bit, or grab the eye and rotate it a little bit. And I collapsed my layers. So the Photoshop file that you guys see, a lot of the layers have just been, collapsed on it. And it's more or less because of just it's easier to work and collapse. I like working on a couple layers versus a lot of layers. And then I think it slows down my workflow process when I have to go hunt for a layer. And here is like I extended the jaw a little bit and I made that, and I thought that worked out well. But like the mouth area, it kind of felt crooked, and I just kept getting this awkward feeling from the mouth. So you'll see me a lot of like little tweaks here and little tweaks there. And I think that was because I couldn't identify what was wrong. I was like, playing with the nose. I felt like everything was crooked, and he kind of had this weird grin, smirk on his face, and that's fine. It's one of those things that you just kind of have to keep building up, and I added a little bit more detail, a little bit more darker shadows, but it just kept feeling like everything was too fake. It just didn't feel right. And I get the skin tone is a little bit awkward. I wanted a bluish hue on the skin tone, and in the end I figured out it was the laugh line on his jaw. It just kept giving me this solid thick shadow, and the rest of the face didn't have that shadow, and so that needed to really be adjusted. Here you can see I'm playing with the eye, and just kind of moving things around a little bit, and I'm touching up the ear and things like that. And I felt the ear was fine. A lot of this is okay, and I guess it's just my art style. Like when I do this type of thing. But here's where I'm starting to flush out the jaw a little bit more and get some of that in there. But then I felt like I had too much going on. Like, just it didn't feel very interesting. It felt very, and I think a lot of it had to do with the lighting and things like that. Here I was running into an error where the underneath one of the drawings was missing. So I straightened out the draw. I got rid of that little out outdent by the mouth, and I kind of played with that a little bit, and I put a little bit more wrinkles in the nose, and I thought that helped a little bit. I thickened up the eyebrows a little bit. I felt that was kind of a big thing, and as you can see, here's where I'm kind of making this eye bigger and starting to piece the eye in a little bit more. And it's these little tweaks that I really try and push the face. You understand the relative ease of everything else, But with the face, the problem is everything seems kind of, if it's not right, it's not right at all. So I wanted to really push the face, and I'm drawing in a little bit more age lines, but again, I'm still missing that major shadow in around the mouth area, and I felt that was what was really causing me the issues. And so, I'm still painting the eyes, trying to get a little bit more like that darker look on there. And I realize, like, after I'm doing this, some of the shapes that I want to get more triangles in there to give it more of that dangerous feeling, but I don't think I really did. I really tried to push the different elements, and I wanted to stay away from this typical collar kind of idea. So I'm just kind of, lighting up and trimming and things like that. So I grabbed some basic stitching in there and things like that. I'm really trying to work with the real life aspect of things instead of like trying to remember how it goes through my head. And it's something that's so stupid simple as grabbing some reference image, and by not grabbing that reference image, I'm losing out. And you can see how much detail I added in this flat feeling vest here. And so I added all that detail in just by simply, getting a little piece of reference. So as I continue working on this, I'm kind of building up my idea. I'm kind of pushing that concept a little bit more, especially which I had a lot of wrinkles in the shirt itself. And I figured cotton wrinkles, no matter how royal you're going to have, you're going to still have those wrinkles and stuff like that in there. And so I just kept kind of working on this process, building up little bits and pieces, and I keep going back to the face. I feel the face is not working right, and I'm really only working on one character right now. So this is my like base character, I would say, and from there I think I'm going to go push a little bit further and kind of create a little bit more life in that character. And so all I'm doing here is I'm adding in a little bit more details around the wrists and things like that, just to kind of clean up that area. I felt like it just needed a little bit more attention. I didn't want to add too much attention or too much polish to the boots or the shoes, because you tend to want to have the character focus more on the face, more on the information of like that type of thing. And so this was a lot of me just kind of pushing towards that. Now here I'm back on the face again, and I again widen the jaw a little bit more. I warp the face a little bit. I go in and kind of tweak around the jaw, and I think that helped quite a bit. It's just that a little bit of push. And here's where I start lightening up the shadows. I think I lowered the eyebrows in a second here, right there. So I lowered the eyebrows, and it blended relatively well. I was pretty happy with that. The nose is okay, and I just right here's where I kind of felt like I needed to go in and I tweaked the eyebrows a little bit, but I needed to go in and kind of lighten up the face. And I have a tendency to do the chiaroscuro, as I mentioned before. I really got that beat into me in college. Like, why isn't there enough chiaroscuro? Why isn't it dark enough? Why isn't it dark enough? And so I need to kind of get away from some of that. Here's I wanted to get a little bit more triangles in there, so I added in this, and I saw kind of a piece where it was kind of this, how do I want to put it? It was kind of like this vest, and it was, so I basically sewed this extra piece in there, and I added in a couple extra pieces here and there, and I actually put some bone little pieces, and I sketched this from from the iPad. It was hot one day, and I didn't feel like turning the laptop on and putting it on my lap. So I added this. I just opened it up in not Sketchbook, but Procreate. I opened it up in there, and I just kind of worked with it on that. And that worked, I think, exceptionally well for what I was doing. And here I'm just kind of adding in these bone claws just to give it a little bit more interest, something a little bit different. And I really wanted to force that tribal aspect. And again, I should have sat down and designed this a little bit more, but I want a real quick base idea of that concept. Like, I don't want to spend, you know, and do a dozen designs on a project like this. I should, but I'm always time limited. I'm always like, I always feel like I need to do a little bit more. So, and the circle was a repetitive item, so that repetition helped, I think. But I don't feel like this is a good aspect of an item, and maybe I'm going to put an iron cross in there or something like that. So I'll play with that a little bit more until I get something I'm pretty happy with. And so I felt like that was, kind of a good idea. And here's again where I'm going back and I'm trying to get rid of that real hard laugh line. I just feel something's wrong with it, and I'm okay with the hands. So here's where I added some of that tribal marking in there, and it's a simple concept here. So I added some of that, just kind of black etching around there, and I added around the collar and the wrists, and I felt like that was just enough to kind of append, if you would, in there. And so I added that in there, and I felt the pants were too dark. I felt like everything was getting really black, and it just needed to kind of lighten up a little bit. So here's where I'm going through, and I'm going in and basically cleaning up the entire character's concept, if you will. Went through and just kind of really quickly color selected the stuff out, so I didn't have to deal with it. And I went in there and just lightened it up just enough to, like, I thought the value was better. And it flattened it out a little bit, so I have to go back in and clean up a little bit more just to get those darks in there. And I worked on a little bit of room lighting, and it's kind of hard to notice because the room lighting, it's dark on dark, so that edge, just to try and round that feature out a little bit more. So then what I did was I essentially kind of pushed in like a little bit more, and I think one of the things that I missed was I went in and did a little bit more wrinkles in the crotch area, and it just was one of those quick fixes, and I didn't realize I wasn't recording, so that gets added in there compared to the other ones. And then what I was doing was working more on just trying to refine the initial concepts so that the initial idea was significantly easier to work with. So now with this all taken care of, I created some notes and sketchbooks that this is what I wanted to do, this is where I wanted to kind of accomplish things. And so I'm just adding a little bit of highlights, and I'm using just a soft round. I realize that a lot of the stuff that you do, it doesn't have to have a great deal of texture to read, especially like pants and things like that. I mean, I could put in some texture and things, but I don't think it would add in that much more depth to the picture. And while I'm doing this, you have to realize that I'm sitting here at sometimes 1, 2 in the morning working on this stuff, getting really tired while doing it. So some of my design choices, I find that if I'm not careful, I have to go back and kind of tweak things. And here's where I'm going in and just adding in a little bit more depth to the boots. I felt the boots, I just sketched out the lines, and I went in and I kind of painted some of this stuff out, and just with a soft brush just added in these parts, and that added in quite a bit of information to it. And I tried to change the silhouette enough that it looked really decent and didn't have, it wasn't like flat lines and smooth lines. So here's where I added in a little bit of depth to the buckles and went in and kind of painted and worked with that as well. So then what I was doing was I was working on, I just kind of highlight some areas and things like that. And these are like the little piddly details that add a little bit more emphasis to the piece itself. And same thing here. I went in and just basically made these straps and kind of painted these straps in there and kind of added in the darks and lights and a little bit of shadows underneath. And it's a really quick thing to do. It's not super hard to do, and you just do it on a new layer and then collapse it down when you're done. And I think that worked significantly well for what I was trying to accomplish. And so when I'm working on this, you have to realize I'm working on a small tablet, and the tablet is a lot harder to draw on. I feel like I feel like I do a better drawing job on my Cintiq, but my Cintiq's on my desk, which I sit at all day and basically grade students. And after a while of just being stuck in the chair, I really get sick of being in the chair, so I tend not to work. Here's basically I'm making a buckle. I make one and then kind of copy and paste it all the way around and kind of warp it as I paint through. So this worked really simple, really easy. I kind of warped things and made it work here. And it was a little bit transparent, but it didn't really matter because I painted it through here. And so that was a feature that I had working on. But yeah, I'm doing a lot of my drawings and stuff like that, and a lot of my tweaks and a lot of my overall concepts in my laptop. And my laptop's a bigger laptop, but it's only got a small screen. So, compared to the 2722s that I have. And here I'm just again doing shadows and things like that have, the shadows are really simple, just add-ins, just kind of quick little details that you can add in. And I felt like there was too much red going on, so I added a green kerchief on there. I should add a texture pattern, I think, maybe later, but I'm not sure if I will. How much detail do you really want to get to on a character design like this? And I'm still screwing with the face. I'm not happy, and I think here's where I got rid of that hard laugh line, and I'm really painting out that laugh line and kind of smoothing out the face a little bit more. I think I need to I paint out the mouth a little bit, and I think that helps quite a bit. But I think that's the big aspect is there's just so much shadow going on in the face, and I need to get rid of the shadow. And so when I'm done with this, finally I just basically go over and copy it all over again and again and again. So that gives me the end result. And so as I'm working on this, it's just more or less simply a development of ideas, and I've got the idea. I like the feeling. I'm cleaning up some things. Here I'm going in and adding a little depth to the embroidery. I also go in and just add in like little hash lines to give it a little texture. I didn't want much texture in there, but just enough was kind of to give me that idea, that base concept of what I was doing for textures and things like that. So that was something that I really wanted to work on and kind of develop here. One of the things that I didn't record was the shadows, and I have a specific brush that I use to basically, it's a paint stroke, and I simply paint it in there. And I use a scratch brush to kind of give it a little bit more light and texture on some of these heavier fabrics. And I don't feel it was very successful. I just feel like it was kind of an add-on of what I was doing. So I think, I added in a little bit more emphasis. I went in and add a little bit more color to the hair and kind of push that element around a little bit. And again, add a little bit more texture to the chest area and where I wanted to help kind of lighten up the whole character. And again, a little bit more texture to these elements. And I think these elements here, like, I should have went in and cleaned them up a little bit, and it's a lot more tweaking, a lot more like piddly stuff than I want to really, I think, mess with at this point in time on a character like this. But it gives me a good element, a good concept for an illustration that I need to kind of work with and develop. And so here I'm not too worried about the details. I added a little bit more, like he's bare-chested, and I thought that gave him a better tribal look. And this is the final results. So I hope you like it.